Hello and welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be covering chapter 11 and 12. I'll be talking about some other things as well as we go along. I just want to start out. I was noticing sometimes we started this semester a little bit on the short side. So you guys are getting familiar with me and at the same time in a very short way. And so I always warn students to, I'm very direct about things and sometimes a little bit harsh in language and so forth in describing things. It's never a thing of not caring or whatever, being judgmental. It's more of just being a little bit more efficient and getting to the point. I've worked for years in education and working in difficult schools and situations and so forth at risk and underserved, underrepresented communities and stuff like that. And I've always had this approach. And one of the downsides of having this approach is sometimes people think of, I'm not caring or whatever. In reality, it's more. I cut to the point because looking back at where I grew up and some of those people I've known who got lost in the shuffle for over these years, I just wish some people were a little bit more direct with them, and admittedly more direct to me back in the day. Well, heck, even last week. Okay, so I should always do that and say that. So sometimes I don't want that happening. All right, let's get started with chapter 11. And now you're going to notice that we skip. It's over. We skip the third part. And the reason why we do that is the third part really goes into informative public speaking, which is your first speech, but we don't, your first speech is more of a informal informative. It's not, that's why it's called special interest or future planning speech. It is like a stepping stone into a more formal structure that we're going to have with informative and persuasion speaking. And your main goal for your first speech is having that speech structure, the outline. That's the most important thing. That's why we emphasize it. That's why we've seen the outline multiple times in this class. So as long as you fit that structure, you're pretty much good to go on the speech, and you try to do it in the right amount of time. That's the reason why we skip, because the part 3 is about more in depth about informative speaking and so forth, and research and setting up your speech, while part 1, 2, and 4 is more the basics of the introduction of speech structure and public speaking in general. So that's why we skip. Chapter 11 goes into that. We've got to get the book out as always. At least I remember it. At least I have it out at the time. When we first started doing this, I always kept having it in the bag from previous classes, in-person classes. So chapter 11 here, organizing your speech. And by the way, we also skip because part 4 really goes over the basics of structure for your speech. But we're going to be covering organizing your speech for chapter 11. And this is a 2-slide one. So that means multiple terms, easy questions for me to ask. It's important to understand organization because we have these things called speech patterns. And so the speech patterns on this terms are anything that says organization on it. Those are considered speech patterns. So anytime you hear me say speech pattern, I'm referring to one of these organizations. And so keep that in mind. And your first speech, by the way, is one of these, and we're going to get to that in a second. But the first one is the most popular one and the easiest one to use, and that is topical organization. Topical organization, the official definition, various essential ideas have natural division. You have to organize them, your speech topically, meaning you have those divisions and diverse in different factors and so forth. It's a topical organization, and they usually run a certain trend. So when you go with primacy, Discuss the most important or convincing idea first. So with primacy and topical speech organization, the most important thing is first. So you have your three main points, main point 1, 2, and 3. In primacy, the pattern is the most important thing you want out there is the first main point. And then it goes down there in order from most important, second most important, third most important. The best way to remember primacy is the one that's closest to your heart. And that is the idea closest to you, and then second and third. So most important thing in primacy topical organization is in main point 1. Regency is when you have it at the end, saving the best for last. So that is the idea. It's almost like a topical setup where you're like, okay, this is important, but this is the most important here. So 1, 2, 3. And so while primacy is same, closest to your heart, number 1, 2, 3, regency is 1, 2, 3, most important being at the end. See how that works? And the reason why, and there's a third one that's complexity, is when the main points range from simple to complicated. Pretty simple pattern there, from simple to complicated. All right. So it's the most used of your speech patterns. It's the one that most students choose when we do informative speaking for your second speech. And so keep that in mind. It's very important to understand that one. Chronological organization is organizing by time and sequence. Your steps are ordered across the when each is considered that they should occur. Your first speech is chronological speech pattern because it is in chronological order, past, present, future. How many of you in the chat have a parent or grandparent who really loves the History Channel? You know, those folks who love those World War II documentaries or anything about history, they're always watching it. Well, I will bet you those folks can tell you a timeline of, of the world wars or something of that nature. First, this happened and this happened, that's happened, and that happened. That's chronological speech pattern. When you give a time order, an order in time with a time frame on it. It's also in sequence when something occurs. And the best example of that is how to bake a cake. If you do an informative speech on how to bake a cake, or how to make build an IKEA shelf. By the way, these are not IKEA, but you understand. How telling someone how to do something in that in sequence order, that's a chronological speech pattern. All right. So by the way, I think all of you, you're going to find that this sounds familiar because all of you have done this some way or another, talking about what's the most important topical speech pattern and saying the best first. You probably have done that on maybe some social issues or your hobbies or so forth. The interest chronological is the same thing. First, you got to do this, next you have to do that, and finally you have to do that. So this is stuff you're familiar with already. It's just formalized language for public speaking. Next one is probably the most difficult one to do for informative, and that is spatial organization. Arranges ideas according to their physical locations or directions. The best way to understand this one is location, location, location. If I'm giving a speech and I'm talking about my trip, and I said, first I went this way, then I stopped here, and then I went to this one over here, and then I went over here, that's spatial. Some people get it confused because you can do a road trip speech in chronological speech pattern, because if you do it in times, the first week we were in this country here, and then we jet over to the next one. And that if you do it time wise, then you are doing chronological. But for the most part, a road trip type speech is in spatial order because you're covering distance. You're going this way, the closest to you, and then the next distance over, and then so forth. Spatial is pretty much majority of those types of speeches are spatial organization, when you're giving a order. The other one, and by the way, this also covers history as well, because sometimes people do presentations about, like, how this land got conquered. If they talk about it not in time, but how they traveled for the conquest, is spatial. And the other one is also direction. So they use an example of, is someone giving a speech about a cell or an atom, the structure of an atom, and they talk about what's in the inside, outside, and the wall on the outside, and so forth. Then they're talking about its distance or the physical location. So it's kind of like when you're talking about a castle. First is the place inside the castle, then the walls, and then the outside of the castle. Same thing with cell structure and so forth. The inside of the cell, the membrane, and what maybe outside the cell, or the connections to it. So it's the most difficult one of the organizational speech patterns, but it can be very effective and makes things interesting. Those three, the first three, are most associated with informative speaking. The next two can be used for informative, but mostly is associated with persuasion, because you're trying to tell somebody either to think a certain way, or telling them this is the way to do stuff. And the first one of that is cause and effect organization. Cause and effect organization might identify a situation and then discuss the effects of the result of it, the cause and the effects. Pretty simple stuff. It's in the title. This is what happened, and this is the effects of what happened. You can use it for informative. In fact, your second speech, cause and effect, is one of the options that you have. But when you're telling somebody, like if you're explaining how something that commonly recognized as an occurrence, like a natural disaster, the earth shake and this building fell, that's a cause and effect that no one's going to dispute. If a giant earthquake happened and a building fell, no one's going to dispute that. When it comes persuasive is when you're saying this is a cause and the effects of it are somewhere in dispute. Either the cause is disputed or the effects of it. Then it becomes persuasion, because you're asking people to change their mind on things. All right. And the last one is definitely persuasion. Very rarely is it using informative, but that is problem solution. Your last speech has to be problem solution organization speech pattern. And it's a simple thing. Here's a problem. Usually by the way, cause and effect and problem solution, the first two main points are usually the first word. Cause, first main point one, main point two, problem, main point one, main point two. And then the last main point is the effect, or in this case, the last one is the solution. So you're setting it up, in this case, with the problem. And then the last main point is the solution that you're bringing forward. You're telling people to do something. All right, we'll get into more of that when we get into persuasion, but that is exactly what it is. Both of these are easy to understand, because everything that happens in the speech is in the title: cause and effect, problem, solution. There's soft evidence and hard evidence. You need to know the difference of that, because that's a testable question. One is like when you talk about opinion or inference or hypotheticals or descriptions or explanations or whatever. These are analogies and stuff like that. That's soft evidence. And that's also witness testimony as well, or witness opinions or experts' opinions and stuff like that. Hard evidence is when you have factual examples and statistics, the hard facts. And that's very important to understand the difference. One has more weight than the other. That's hard evidence, but at the same time, soft evidence gives a little bit more storytelling to something. So there's no right or wrong there. So when you are talking about, persuasive, both of those are an option. And so some of the main parts, okay, so again, if you have questions, ask them or save them till the end. I already asked you one to put some opinions on there. Go ahead and in the chat, as long as it's appropriate for the class, talk about just mention some problems in our society either important or not so important in the chat that maybe that we need to find a solution for. Of course, appropriate for the classroom. And we're going to move on to the reason why we have this is, again, your speech is not your introduction or your conclusion. Your speech is the main points. So you need to organize your main ideas. And that's why we have these speech patterns, these organizations. It organizes your main idea because it is an easy thing to flow from chronological to spatial, how to get there. Hey, we have a problem. Here's a solution. This is an organization, and it makes it easier for you to draft a speech. If you ever have been given an essay question where you have to write an essay for something on a test, sometimes students find it difficult to write those essays because they don't know how to structure it. In public speaking, we have these structures there for you. And it's a great method to just use these structures for these different types of speeches, not just for this class, but other speeches in your future and other classes. All right, it's organizing, not just for your audience, it's for your audience to pay attention and to follow, but it's also for you. Makes it easier for you to have these. All right, that's why we do it. And then there's these speech patterns. We have topical, chronological, spatial, cause and effect, problem, solution. All of them can be informative, all of them could be persuasive, but some of them tend to be informative, topical, chronological, spatial, and cause and effect, problem, solution tend to be more persuasive. And then problem solution is very much persuasive. All right. The most flexible of them all is topical. The most complicated is spatial. And it's important to understand that these things are very distinct and they're different. There's no merging of these. You know how some of these things you learn, like listening styles and so forth, you can have a little bit of both, and you know it's sometimes better to have a little bit. Don't do that. You choose one of these five and that's it. Don't merge or try to be clever or anything like that. Just one of these five. And the most important thing to understand about these speech patterns is that it is something the audience recognize. Why do we do this and why do we use these speech patterns? Because the audience knows this stuff, and we've already gave examples of it. Every time you've told someone how to do something, congratulations, you've done a chronological speech. Every time you have talked about problems in a relationship with someone, either a friendship or a relationship. Congratulations, you've done a problem solution speech, or in relationship with family members. Anytime you talk about what's important to you when you're watching Game of Thrones, like which characters are most important to you, you put them down into different things. Congratulations, topical speech pattern. So you've done these already, and the audience recognizes these orders as well, because they've TV shows, news broadcasts, books, articles, they run these types of patterns as well. And so it's important to understand that you've already done these and that the audience recognizes the patterns and makes it easier to follow along. The most important thing on your speech is following the speech structure that's given to you in the outline and adapting these speech patterns for it. Again, the audience recognition of patterns, very important. When you are going in these speech patterns, you got to tell your audience how to come along and direct them. And so this chapter also covers signpost. Organize your presentation for the ears of others. Signposting. And a signpost is organization cues for your audience ears. They include the previews, transitions, and summaries. We already covered signpost, but signpost is the word that says it all, not just one or the other. It's transitions, preview, review, summaries are all signposts. And the most important ones are transitions, preview, and review. If you get a comment on your speech feedback that says there are no signposts, that means you missed those. And there's some internal and smaller signposts in the speech, but the three that you should be always aware of and make sure you always hit is the transitions and then the review and preview and review and main points. So those are signposts. And so preview, internal preview, initial preview, and internal preview. Look up those definitions. This essentially is a statement of what is to come, statement of the ideas that which are to come, the initial preview. And then the internal one is when you outline ideas. So sometimes in your main point summaries, usually the last comment in the main point summary is what you're going to say in your subpoints. So you see how it works then, your overall preview, your internal preview, initial preview, and your internal preview. And that's it. There's just layers. What I want you to focus on is the basics of these transitions. We already talked about it, verbal transitions, and non-transitions are exactly what they are. I first talked about my past. Now I'm going to talk about my present. That's a verbal transition. At the same time, there's non-verbal transition where people will say this. Okay, I talked about this. Now I'm going to go here. When you do a little hand gesture. In public speaking, we move our bodies to certain points. It's called a speaker triangle. For debate, for forensics, debate competitions, the speaker triangle. So nonverbal transition sometimes is just, I'm going to talk about this, then I'm going to talk about that, and finally I'm going to talk about this. Nonverbal cues. Summary, final summary, internal summary, same thing. Same thing as preview, just a little bit reverse order. That's it. All right. And the reason why we have these signposts is there's organization and speech pattern. We talked about the speech pattern itself. Now we're talking about the directional guide. So if you have evidence, for example, you got them on the preview, you set them up for your speech, and now you're directing them into your main points and into your sub points, or your evidences, or your reasoning, or your those types of things. And that, again, it's all leading to your bread and butter, your meat and potatoes, the reasoning, the evidence, explanation, the definitions, all that good stuff. That's mostly found in your subpoints. All right. Subpoints is the key in these. Reason why we want to make sure we hit these transitions and so forth. It's directing your audience to, like I said, the goal, the treasure of your speech. You think of it, where's my video game players? Go ahead and give me a thumbs up if you're a video gamer. This is the part of the dungeon that has the treasure, the subpoints. And so you're taking that quest to it. Or in the zombie movie, that room that you find the survival gear and you can scavenge. And that's where the transition sign points are leading you to the subpoints. All right. And it's a simple thing where you have the previews setting up in the speech. And while you're giving your speech, you're transitioning to your different parts. And then you wrap it up and remind people what you're doing. That's pretty much it. Any questions on chapter 11 or any of that stuff? Chapter 11 is a 2-slider. Chapter 12 is a 1-slider. It is a basic one that pretty much sets up how to organize your outlines. Let me get into it. Outlining and revising your speech. And there are some things terms here. And I'll be honest with you, I really don't ask that many questions or any questions from chapter 12, but you should know this because it helps you prepare for your speech. Preparation outline, standard outline form, and speaking notes are great terms for you to know and understand because it gives you suggestions on how to set up, how to do your outline. There's a quick note outline over on this page on 107. It's really nice. I'll go ahead and put this up again. You asked me to show it in class if I remember the book. But the thing is, it's a great, actually, you know what I'll do? I'll just do this because I'm smart. There it is. So more of the screen. So let's see. See the camera can focus. That gives you a general idea what it is. So that's just a quick one. That's not your actual outline for the class. It's just like a generic one. All right. We're going to actually do keyword outlines and then show you that because that's a great tool that you can use for your second and third speech. All right. So there's outline forms. Use an outline. Do not write out. Do never write out your speech. Never write it out. You want short, brief sentences that kind of just wraps it up, because what you do is you take your outline and you have those keywords and so forth, and you grow your speech from there. You grow it from those keywords and so forth. In the speech, you have your roadmap, your signpost, and your attention getter to kind of set up your overall outline. Because like I said, the attention getter and the memorable closer can wrap up your speech. And then inside of there, you need to just take them along. The preview main points are more importantly the roadmap, as I like to call it. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge might be an answer for you on the midterm. It kind of tells your audience how we're going to get, what we're going to be doing for the main points. And then the signposts in your speech leads them in that route. And you need to take the speaking notes, the official definition. Let me get the official definition. Prepare a shorter outline to serve as your speaking notes. Is like how sometimes what students will do will be like keyword outlines, or maybe they'll have their outlines, a preliminary one printed out and write notes on it. But these are things that help you with your speaking notes, right? Print out your outline, always good. Even in an all digital online class, print out your outline so you can write on it, write notes and so forth. It's an important part. Elaborating, important part, because you're doing a certain kind of speech where you're not memorizing or you're not reading it off. You never read off your speech. What you do is you have some keywords or short sentences that you look at and okay, I got to do this amount here and make it this, all right? And you don't write this part out. What you do is you have that short little thing and you look at it, you know what it is, and then you elaborate. Then you add it with your words, your mind. It's like if I see this and my word is pen. But then I think of, okay, well, I have a pen in my hand that I use for writing. Sometimes I'll flick them in my hands. Because it's just something I do sometimes. It has a nice soft tip for touch screens. And then of course, if you want to, you can put it on your shirt, which I'm not going to do because I don't think, I could. Okay, there you go. It works. All right. So I just had the one word, pen, and then I elaborated and I talked about it. Elaboration is an important part of public speaking and setting up for your speech. And you should write out your outlines and your cue cards, and we'll get into cue cards after you turn in your outline by elaborating. Okay. Support and citation, that's more when we get into the second and third speech, but you need to understand that is a thing that you need to understand. And then finally, the cues for your audience. It's not just the signpost and transition, it is also the intro sections, letting them know, setting them up for your thesis, telling them why they should listen, why they are there in the first place with the audience relevance and speaker credibility, why you. These are just things that helps you set up your entire speech and so forth. And that's chapter 11 and 12. Any questions and so forth, save it for the end and we are good to go. All right. Have a good one and I'll see you live in a few seconds. All right, there you go.